Here at Our Lady of Mercy, we seek to offer every person a life-changing encounter with Jesus, to grow disciples, and to send them on mission. Great. I'm going to ask you again next week if you can believe it or not. So just, look forward to that. Anticipation, right? And these three are interdependent. They depend on each other, and they're all important, just as much as faith, hope, and love are important. And since this is the case, this is very important that we actually remember this and that we care about it, because, them being interdependent, what that implies is that if we're not doing numbers 2 and 3, if we're not growing as disciples and living out mission, then we are putting our encounter, we are putting our faith at risk. And that's something that we don't want to do. So with that in mind, let's spend some time on hope. I've only been to New York City once, and I'm okay with that, but what struck me in a particular way while I was there was my experience at St. Patrick's Cathedral. If you've ever been there, it is an absolutely gorgeous church that immediately raises your heart and your mind to God as soon as you walk through the front doors. But what actually struck me, ironically, even more so when I was there, was what I saw when I walked out of the front doors of the cathedral. Because there, standing on the threshold of this beautiful witness to the majesty and the glory and the beauty that is within our Catholic Church, I was immediately confronted with a 7-ton, 45-foot tall statue of the Greek god Atlas, carrying the universe on his back. Now, I don't know a lot about art, but from what I know is that artists typically not only take into account the piece itself, which they are creating, but also the space in which it's going to be placed. Because then their piece can really speak to those who encounter it and into the world that surrounds it. And so this being the case, since this atlas, which adorns the Rockefeller Center of all places, and since it had its face set stern against the front doors of this Catholic cathedral with its muscles strained and the world on its back, I could not help but think that this was at least in some way on purpose. Almost as if it was modern man's boast saying, "You Catholics claim to offer salvation, but we don't need God. We're doing just fine, and we have evolved beyond that." Well, regardless of why it is placed there specifically, I think the statue proves very helpful and useful as an image today with regards to hope. Because confronted with life as we all encounter it, with all of its gritty details, we all understand that life can be rather heavy sometimes. That to endure the burdens of life can sometimes feel like we're literally carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. And stuck in this situation, what else are we to do? To fail to carry these burdens means that we will be crushed by them. Just as much as when someone lacks hope, it means despair, so to refusing to carry the burdens of life means either being flattened by them into an ugly mess of anger and bitterness and contempt, or else if we refuse to carry them and we shirk them off onto somebody else, we're merely going to end up crushing somebody else with the weight of our problems. Either stance we choose doesn't look so good. There's a reason why Atlas's predicament is portrayed as a punishment in Greek mythology. Well, thankfully, St. Peter offers us some help. According to Luke's gospel, Peter had actually already met Jesus before we get to today's gospel. One day, Jesus had shown up into Peter's synagogue, started preaching, and then exorcised a demon in front of everybody. And then if that wasn't enough, somehow Jesus ends up at Peter's house. I don't know if he invited himself over or what. Peter, tonight I must dine at your place. Okay. And when he shows up, what does he do? He raises Peter's mother-in-law from her deathbed, having a fever, and heals her. And then proceeds to set up shop in Peter's front living room as all of the sick in the area and all of the demoniacs, all of those possessed. You can imagine everybody who's sick in town and everybody who's acting a little crazy, that they're all just starting to pour into your living room because this Jesus showed up. And he begins curing all of them right in his very home. Talk about a life-changing encounter with Jesus, huh? So then how do we get to today's gospel? Well, what's important to realize is that amidst all of this ruckus, and it's very subtle, amidst all of this ruckus with Jesus healing these people right in Peter's house, we hear that Peter ended up, quote, fishing all night. Did you catch that? Think about it. How odd that when this miracle-working Messiah performs marvels right in the middle of your very house, you say, oh, wow, that's super cool, but, I got to get back to work this evening. The fish aren't going to catch themselves after all. That's how Peter ended up meeting Jesus on the shore that morning. Peter had already had quite the encounter with Jesus, not once, but several times and in several very astounding ways, and yet clearly his faith still needed to grow. Perhaps that's why at this miracle that we heard today, he falls at the knees of Jesus and says, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Because even though he had literally seen Jesus work miracles in front of his very eyes, he still was not yet at the point of dropping everything in order to follow him. And here, my friends, we come to the necessity and the importance of hope. You see, whereas in faith, we hear and we choose to accept that God has not only said, "Here I am," but also, "I love you." In hope, we choose to believe and understand and trust that God has not only said that to us now, but also in the future, that he will do so. In other words, that God has not only loved us unto death, and we experience that now, but he will continue loving us unto death, even our death, every day of our lives. In the case of Peter, he may have left his house thinking, wow, Jesus can do all these healings, but, someone's got to put the fish on the table, and he was being practical, right? Who can blame him for that? But look what happens. He labors all night and catches nothing. And when Jesus shows up, and just at his very command, the boats are in danger of sinking because of the catch. It's almost as if Jesus were simply saying to us in this miracle, look, again, I am in control of all things, including those things which you think you are strong enough to carry on your own. Because abide in me and I in you, for without me you can do nothing. John 15. The issue is what we might call very simply sinful self-reliance. Like Peter, all of us are very often tempted to just rely upon ourselves, and at the cost of that, we forget where our source of peace will actually come from. This is especially true when it comes to the areas of our strengths. Whether we say, like Peter, "Oh, I'm phenomenal at fishing," or "I'm phenomenal at business or accounting," or whatever it might be. All I have to do is work harder, and then I will find peace. All I have to do is work harder, and then I will cast this sin out of my life. All I have to do is work harder, and I will be able to build a comfortable life for myself and for my family. Like Atlas, we are tempted to try to carry the weight of the universe on our own shoulders. And on the other side of the same coin, when we, like Peter, offer our weaknesses as an excuse for why we are catching nothing in this search for peace, Jesus simply replies, "Do not be afraid. I will make you fishers of men." I can carry that too. And he proved it to us when he carried it all the way to Calvary. If then we as a whole, or we as individuals, find ourselves trying to carry the weight of our lives without Jesus, then the question is, who are we putting our hope in? And if we are worried about tomorrow, anxious about the news, angry at the world and the people who inhabit it, who are we putting our hope in? Politicians, scientists, activists, ourselves, certainly not God. Our hope lies in heaven. Our hope lies in Christ. Jesus is Lord, and he can be Lord of our lives as well. Now, of course, don't hear what I'm not saying. Don't get me wrong. Politics, science, and our own efforts have their own place, right? God doesn't ever force us to do things. He doesn't force us to avoid evil. We have to actually cooperate with his grace. But at the end of the day, and this is a simple litmus test, at the end of the day, if we have not spent time in prayer, if we have found that we have lost our peace, then we have probably fallen into self-reliance and placed our hope somewhere other than in God. Easier said than done. I get it, right? I struggle with this myself, but that's why hope is called a theological virtue. Theological because it stems from faith in God, and a virtue because, like all virtues, the more that we practice it, the better that we get at it. And so that's why if we are to grow as disciples, to come to this beautiful place where we hunger to follow Jesus, where we yearn to learn more about him, where we seek to serve and even just to be with God in all things, all of these things stem from placing our hope more and more, not in ourselves, but in the things that will last, in heaven, in God. And if we want to avoid fishing all night and catching nothing in our search for true peace in life, then simply consider which of the various groups at our parish that God might be calling you to join, whether it's Salt and Light, or Fit Shepherds, or Vines and Branches, or Mother's Heart, or Light, or Edge, or Consuming Fire, or any one of our various groups, which literally cover every age group, who simply gather together, pray, study, and grow as disciples of Christ. And if you are in this place where you feel like you have not yet had this encounter with Jesus, where his existence has practically seized you like it finally did Peter, then just sign up for the men's or women's chirp weekends, which are coming up in a couple weeks, because it can literally be life-changing. Though my trip to New York was short-lived, I want to share with you that I was actually able to return back to St. Patrick's the next day. And I was happy to be able to find some peace and some quiet amidst all the hustle and bustle of New York City, in the Eucharistic chapel that they have right behind the high altar inside the church. And when I was leaving for the last time, I again saw a figure holding the weight of the world. Except this time, it was inside the cathedral. It was a little statue of the child Jesus behind the high altar of the cathedral. And wouldn't you know it, that very same world, which Atlas was struggling to carry on the other side of the street, was being held gently and easily